both hands well, so it's a perfect fit. Natural lefty who fights right-handed says he will switch it up tonight. Teddy, I always find it very interesting when you have a natural left-handed person who, when they start boxing, fights orthodox, fights right-handed, because many times you see that they have such good use of the jab and the left hook, such accuracy, control, and power with it.
Well, the reason why a trainer will switch around a naturally left-handed fighter is because they're afraid that they might not get fights as a southpaw, that somebody may turn them down, they get blackballed a little bit. It'd be difficult to move them. So naturally they take them in the gym, and as you said, Joe, they take away one of their great assets, being a southpaw, you know, using that natural left hand as their power hand, and sometimes they take away an asset of keeping them from being a southpaw. But one thing about a fighter who's naturally left-handed, who's turned around to fight orthodox as his right, that left hand will be as strong as hand, with the hook and with the jab.
Punch there, don't hold.
Wallace is stepping up, way up in class as far as I'm concerned here tonight against Wright.
Wallace was introduced to the sport as a young child, but he didn't start his amateur career until he was 24 years old, turned pro at age 27. There's a straight right hand from Walter Wright.
Not only difficult enough for Wallace that he's stepping up in competition, he's taking this fight on a 1.5 weeks notice. But his weight would say he's in shape. Coming in at 154 pounds tonight, actually 3 pounds less than his last fight 4 months ago.
That was back in September, won a majority decision against Chris Graves, a rematch of a fight he had in July of 2005 when he won by disqualification when Chris Graves put him in a headlock and pulled on his neck. Trying to work the jab.
Another thing going against Wallace, if we get into the later rounds, he's never been past 6 rounds. So he's stepping up in competition and in distance. Wright has been 10 rounds 1 time.
Of course, Walter Wright has been 10 rounds, but on the Contender tournament, 5-round fight. So he's looking forward to having a little more distance, and he's scoring well here in the final minute of this first round. And now Wallace comes in on the attack. There's a good snapping stiff jab from Walter Wright.
You could see the less experienced Wallace wasting a lot of motion. Does a lot of extra motion, and that may wear on him as we get late.
End of 1. Walter Wright in the white trunks with blue trim coming out against Dan Wallace. Wright described this as like being his second pro debut coming out of the Contender Series, where he gained such popularity. Now trying to springboard his career. Hopefully it won't go like his first pro debut when he was knocked out in the 3rd round by Matt O'Brien, a fight he was winning, but then got caught showboating and got leveled. Look at the total punches from round 1. Wallace, a lot of nervous energy, big output, 117, but only landed 22 punches. Meanwhile, Wright landed 26, only needed to throw 56 to do so.
And part of that speaks to the difference in experience with Wallace, the less experienced fighter, over Wright. Wallace, as we said at the end of the last round, a lot of extra movement, a lot of wasted movement. It can have an impact on him as the rounds go on, especially if he goes into those uncharted rounds, those uncharted territories past the 6th round where he's never been before.
Triple jab by Walter Wright. There's a left hook coming from Wright. Wallace himself told us that he wants to utilize the jab. He's one of these guys that tries to be a real student of the game and think it through and understands the mental aspect. He says, hey, the jab does 3 things I like. Scores points, sets up the next punch, and keeps my distance. Gets turned around by Wright, now comes back firing a right hand to the body. Left-handed uppercut by Walter Wright, then goes to a straight right hand before going to the body with a combination of lefts and rights.
Again, you can't help but notice how much harder Wallace has to work to get anything done, where Wright does not waste much more conservative, but when he works, much more effective.
First 2 minutes of this second round details that, Teddy. Wallace was 7 of 48, Wright 15 of 35.
Wright knows when to throw. Wallace just throws to try to find out and get to the right place.
Snapping jab off the hip from Wright.
Again, all the work that started about 8 yards ago for Wright or for Wallace. A lot of wasted movement.
Big right hand for Wright at the end of 2.
Little action from the last round. You see a lot of movement from Wallace, and you see a low left hand and pulling back right into the frame of the right hand of Wright.
Round number 3, Friday Night Fights presented by Just for Men. Joe Tessitore alongside Teddy Atlas. Walter Wright off to a good start against the undefeated but untested Dan Wallace in the black and gray. Scheduled for 8. Of course, still to come tonight, another alumnus of the Contender Season 2, K9 Cornelius Bundridge, in what is a highly anticipated matchup against the guy that just a few years ago was being talked of as the prospect with all the upside, Chris Smith. That's still to come.
We talked about earlier about this being a big step up in class for Wallace. Let's put the numbers to it. Wright's combined records of his last 4 opponents.
Good left hook by Walter Wright.
The last 4 opponents of Wright have a combined record of 64-4-2. For Wallace, the combined records of all his opponents, Joe, 26 wins, 39 losses, and 3 draws. Right there, you see what a step up indeed it is in class for Wallace tonight with Wright.
And it's showing itself early here. That step up getting the best of him. There's a good left hook a minute into this third round, and time again we've seen Dan Wallace going back and being right in the path of an oncoming right hand from Walter Wright. That jab comes off the hip of Wright. Once again it lands.
Again, a lot of extra movement for Wallace, but not always the proper movement or effective movement, as you just said. He moves right into the path of Wright, who's set to throw that right hand.
See that right hand cocked, but that left hand many times lingering below the hip, but yet Dan Wallace not in position and not offensively capable of taking advantage. The punch track, the jabs in real time, you can see 6% landed for Wallace. That's it.
You remember those old handball players down the handball courts you used to see when you were young, Joe?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, back in New York.
This reminds me of that a little bit. You know, Wallace is one of those young handball players that runs left, he runs right, and he runs backwards to get to a ball that was to his left.
Exactly.
Extra motion. And you see those older veteran handball players, and they stay in one spot, and at the last second, they know where the ball's going to be. Well, Wright knows where Wallace is going to be. He doesn't waste any movement.
Interesting warning from Jeff Macaluso. You may have noticed that in the past 45 seconds, Walter Wright was sticking out his tongue against Dan Wallace because Wallace was doing that earlier in the round. Macaluso said, cut it out, both of you. Nobody wants to lose a tongue here. End of 3.
That's it.
Take a look.